food, which is now referred to as a bolus because it's food and saliva mixed together, moves through the pharynx and the esophagus on its way to the stomach. So the pharynx allows for passage of food, fluids, and air. It's shared with the respiratory system. It's composed of stratified squamous epithelium lining with mucus-producing glands. The external muscle layers consist of two skeletal muscle layers, an inner layer of muscles that run longitudinally, and an outer pharyngeal constrictors that run in circular pattern around the walls of the pharynx. The esophagus, below that, is a flat muscular tube that runs from the laryngopharynx to the stomach. It's collapsed when it doesn't have food in it, when it's not moving food towards the stomach. It pierces the diaphragm, goes through the diaphragm at the esophageal hiatus, joins the stomach at the cardial orifice. There is a sphincter muscle there, correctly referred to as the gastroesophageal sphincter, but commonly referred to as the cardiac sphincter. That keeps the orifice closed when food's not being swallowed, and there are mucus cells on both sides of that sphincter that help protect the esophagus from the acid contents of the stomach. The esophagus has all four alimentary canal layers, as we spoke of before. The esophageal mucosa contains stratified squamous epithelium. At the top, as it makes its way to the bottom, it's going to change to a more simple columnar. There are esophageal glands in the submucosa that secrete mucus and aid in the movement of the bolus. The muscularis externa is skeletal muscle. Superiorly, it's mixed in the middle and then becomes smooth muscle in the lower part. As we mentioned before, it has adventitia instead of serosa. And here's a picture of it microscopically. And again, figure 2313, you should look over in your book. Heartburn is caused by stomach acid making its way into the esophagus. Can be a first symptom of gastroesophageal reflux disease, or GERD. That can be caused by an excess of food or drink, extreme obesity, pregnancy, even running. It can also be caused by a hiatal hernia, which is a structural abnormality where part of the stomach protrudes above the diaphragm. GERD can lead to esophagitis and inflammation of the esophagus, esophageal ulcers, and even esophageal cancers. The pharynx and the esophagus are basically conduits to pass food from the mouth to the stomach. So therefore, their major function is propulsion, and that propulsion starts with deglutition, which is swallowing. That involves a coordination of 22 muscle groups in two different phases: a buccal phase, which is a voluntary contraction of the tongue, and a pharyngeal esophageal phase, which is an involuntary phase that primarily involves the vagus nerves working through the swallowing centers in the medulla and the lower pons. Here's an overview, and we'll go through each one of these in turn. So we start with the buccal phase. In the buccal phase, the upper esophageal sphincter is contracted and closed. The tongue will press against the hard palate, forcing the food bolus into the oropharynx. And then the pharyngeal esophageal phase will begin, in which the tongue blocks the mouth, the soft palate and the uvula rise, closing off the nasopharynx. The larynx rises so that the epiglottis blocks the trachea, and the upper esophageal sphincter relaxes so that food can enter the esophagus. From there, it continues, and the constrictor muscles of the pharynx contract, forcing the food into the esophagus inferiorly, and the upper esophageal sphincter contracts after the food is in. Peristalsis will then move the food through the esophagus to the stomach until it reaches the cardiac sphincter, or the gastropharyngeal sphincter, that allows it to enter the stomach, and then that sphincter would close and the tube would be collapsed. And that brings us to the stomach. I'm going to stop there, and I'll pick up the stomach in the next set.